I came back to myself under the fluorescent buzz of hospital lights, each flicker pulling at the edge of a memory I couldn't quite hold. The room was quiet except for the rhythmic beep of a monitor somewhere to my left, syncing with my heartbeat like a metronome set to someone else's time. My mouth was dry, my body heavy. There was the dull ache of living in bones that weren't sure if they should keep going. I didn't know how long I'd been unconscious. The nurses wouldn't tell me much at first. "You had a collapse," they said. "Severe stress, malnutrition." It sounded clinical, detached, like I was a file in a cabinet, not a person they peeled off the floor. The first thing I asked when I could talk again wasn't about what happened. It was, "Did anyone come?" There was a long pause before the nurse, Carla, her badge red, shook her head. "We left messages. Your family hasn't responded." That was when it all came rushing in. Not memories exactly, but sensations. The chill of our family house in Maine, the sound of Evelyn's heels on tile, the way Graham's eyes never looked at me, only through me. Walter's silence, thick and immovable. I didn't remember falling, but I remembered why I'd been on the edge. Carla stayed with me longer than she needed to. She would refill my water, smooth out the sheets, sit beside me in silence when the panic crept up in the early hours. She had the kind of presence that didn't demand anything. I wasn't sure if I trusted her. Kindness made me suspicious. "You have people?" she asked once, gently, like she already knew the answer. I nodded because technically I did. There was Evelyn, always perfectly dressed in grief and disappointment. Graham, who had learned young that control was a form of love. And Walter, who had mastered the art of absence without ever leaving the room. But having people wasn't the same as being held by them. Lying in that bed, I started to remember. Not in whole pictures, but in fragments. Evelyn at the kitchen table, her voice like frost. "You've always been dramatic, Adelaide. Honestly, it's exhausting." Graham standing in the doorway of my room, flipping the light switch on and off. "You don't get to sulk forever. Nobody's coming to rescue you." Walter looking through me, always through me, as if I were a shadow that moved without meaning. My name is Adelaide Monroe, and for a long time I thought maybe I was broken in ways that couldn't be named. They never hit me. That's what makes it harder to explain. There were no bruises, no screaming matches, no dramatic exits, just the slow erosion of self, the quiet correction of feelings. That didn't happen. "You're being sensitive. It's not as bad as you think." I don't remember the moment I collapsed. I remember the feeling of walking into that grocery store, trying to choose between oat milk and almond, and suddenly not knowing who I was doing it for. I remember my vision blurring, the hum of fluorescent lights, the distant sound of someone calling out. When I woke up, I thought for sure that someone would be there. Evelyn, maybe, even just to scold me for embarrassing the family, but the silence was louder than any reprimand. Carla was the one who sat with me, who said my name like it mattered. It made me feel uncomfortable. Like maybe I'd been wrong all these years. Maybe I wasn't invisible. Or maybe I was just starting to wake up to how invisible they'd made me. On the third day, it started to rain. I watched it run down the window like it was trying to escape the sky. Carla brought in a small lamp with a warm light. "Fluorescence can be a bit much," she said. I wanted to ask why she cared. Instead, I stared at that lamp like it was a lighthouse. Something about its soft glow reminded me that the storm wasn't new. I'd just been pretending the clouds were part of the view. That night, I dreamt of the house. Not the real one, but how it felt. Cold, grand, untouched. The walls were lined with portraits of people who didn't smile. I walked through the halls barefoot, my steps silent on the hardwood. Every door I opened led to another version of myself. Crying in a bathroom, hiding in a closet, sitting in the dark. And then, me in a hospital bed, eyes open, watching the rain. I woke up gasping and Carla was there. "Bad dream?" she asked. I nodded. She handed me a glass of water. "Dreams are just our minds telling the truth in pictures." I wondered what truth mine had been painting, that I'd never really left the house, that even collapsed on a grocery store floor, I'd been trying to get their attention. When they finally called, 4 days after my admittance, it wasn't Evelyn. It was Graham. His voice was flat. "You okay?" he asked, like I'd tripped in the driveway. When I didn't answer right away, he added, "Mother said she'll send someone to pick you up when you're cleared." Send someone, not come herself. That was the moment the dread settled in my chest, not of going home, but of what I might find there. Or worse, what I wouldn't. I'd always told myself I just needed to be stronger, that if I worked harder, stayed quieter, earned their approval, it would all get better. But lying there in that too-bright hospital bed, I started to realize maybe the goal had never been healing. Maybe it had been survival. And maybe, just maybe, I'd already done the hardest part. The car ride to the estate felt like sinking. Each mile closer to the coastline brought a heavier quiet, the kind that settles into your skin and refuses to leave. The driver didn't speak, didn't ask questions. Maybe that was a kindness. I wasn't ready to say anything out loud yet. When the house came into view, I forgot how to breathe. It sat like a monument against the slate-colored sea, 3 stories of stone and shadow. The windows were tall and shuttered, like the eyes of someone who knew too much. I'd once called it home, but it had always felt like a museum of lives that didn't include me. The front door opened before I reached it. Evelyn stood there, composed as ever in a tailored gray suit, her hair swept into a chignon so tight it seemed to hold her whole face in place. "Adelaide," she said, not a trace of emotion. I nodded. "Mother." Inside, the house was exactly as I remembered. Cold floors, tall ceilings, rooms steeped in expensive silence. The smell of old wood and lavender polish clung to the walls. Time hadn't touched anything. The same portrait of Evelyn in her debutante gown dominated the foyer, while photos of Graham lined the hallway. None of me. There never were. She led me to the parlor where Graham waited by the fireplace, scotch in hand despite the early hour. He didn't rise. "Nice of you to finally come home," he said, voice smooth but loaded. "I was in the hospital." "Yes, we heard." Evelyn sat across from me, legs crossed, smile thin. "We're glad you're well now. It was concerning." Her concern didn't reach her eyes. I stared at the fire, trying to remember the warmth it was supposed to give. Our conversations over the next hour felt like walking through a maze, designed to keep me lost. Every time I tried to steer us toward anything real, why no one came, why they didn't answer, the conversation was rerouted. "You've always been so sensitive," Evelyn said when I brought up the silence. "Some things aren't meant to be dramatized." Graham added, "You're lucky Carla found you. Can't imagine what would have happened otherwise." I could. The room they gave me hadn't changed. Same pale blue walls, same twin bed, same dresser with the cracked mirror. I stepped in, and it was like being 15 again. I touched the mirror, traced the fissure that split it down the middle. I remembered the night it broke. Evelyn slamming the door, yelling something about ungratefulness, me flinching so hard my elbow knocked the glass. I sat on the bed and stared. The air was thick with memory. That night, I opened the top drawer and found a note, folded neatly under my old journals. The handwriting was shaky. "You weren't supposed to remember. Della. She was still here, somewhere, the only person who ever looked at me like I mattered." The next morning, I found her in the kitchen, chopping herbs with slow, practiced motions. She looked older, thinner, but her eyes lit up when she saw me. "You came back," she said, barely a whisper. I nodded. "You left me a note." She glanced over her shoulder, then leaned in. "You need to be careful. They're already watching." The unease that had been simmering since I arrived boiled up. Later, while unpacking, I found something else. An old journal, leather-bound, tucked into a hollow space in the back of my closet. I didn't remember ever owning it. When I opened it, my breath caught. The entries were in my handwriting. The tone was mine. But the memories, they weren't. Pages filled with stories of being watched, of someone whispering through the walls, of nights locked in the basement. Dates and names that didn't align with anything I recalled. Each entry ended with my name, Adelaide, but I hadn't written them. I stopped trusting the corners of my own mind sometime around the second night back. Sleep came in pieces, frayed and twitching. I would jolt awake, drenched in sweat, still hearing Evelyn's voice echoing through the walls like it had rooted there decades ago. "This behavior's beneath you, Adelaide. You don't know what's good for you. Stop being dramatic." Sometimes I wasn't even sure I'd slept at all. I would blink and find myself standing in front of the bathroom mirror, not knowing how I got there. The edges of reality blurred like watercolor in a storm. My dreams bled into waking hours. Nightmares of being restrained, of choking on something I couldn't see, of hands forcing pills past my lips. There were gaps, pockets of silence in my memory that pulsed like bruises. I couldn't trust time. I would find the shower still running when I didn't remember stepping in. My phone's camera roll showed photos I didn't remember taking, close-ups of peeling wallpaper, family portraits, Graham's closed door. I started documenting everything, each flicker of memory, each sensation that pulled too hard. I taped index cards to the walls of my bedroom, drew arrows connecting fragments. Age 13, locked door. Evelyn sobbing theatrically after incident. Graham, smirk. You were lucky she didn't send you away then. Blue pills, vitamin bottle, hospital smell. The web grew dense and dark, the shape of a life I didn't remember consenting to. One morning, I opened the medicine cabinet and froze. A dusty bottle with no label, just the worn imprint of a pharmacy logo and a childproof cap. I opened it. Inside, tiny blue capsules. My stomach turned. The word vitamins surfaced in my mind like a corpse rising from a lake. I remembered Evelyn's gentle, persistent tone. They'll help you. Just a little support. Don't be difficult. I remembered the dizziness that followed, the sleep so deep it felt like erasure. I remembered waking up not knowing how many days had passed. There had been a therapist, too. Evelyn insisted I see her after I stopped eating at 15, after I carved a small line into my thigh with the tip of a mechanical pencil. We all have to process things, she'd said, as if trauma was an inconvenience I'd spilled onto the rug. But the sessions were always one-sided. The therapist, Dr. Callahan, never asked about Evelyn or Graham. She asked about my defiance, my reactions, my instability. Your mother says you struggle with emotional regulation, she'd said, writing something down without looking up. I dug through the attic that afternoon, opening old boxes until I found the business card. Dr. Judith Callahan, Family Behavioral Institute. I called the number, disconnected. It took 3 more calls and a favor from Leon to confirm it. The institute had been shut down 3 years ago. Malpractice. Several patients claimed their diagnoses had been manipulated under pressure from parents or spouses. There had been lawsuits. No one had heard from Callahan since. Leon. I hadn't thought of him in years, but his name came back to me like a held breath. He'd been my only real friend in high school. We shared a love of books we weren't supposed to read and jokes whispered behind library shelves. We lost touch after graduation. My family made sure of that. I sent him a message, just a short, sharp, I think I'm starting to remember. Can we talk? His response came fast. Name the time and place. When I saw him again, it felt like opening a window after years of stale air. His hair was shorter, his eyes sharper, but he still looked at me like I was real. We met at an old diner just off the highway. He ordered coffee. I didn't touch mine. You okay? He asked. No, I said. I told him everything, the hospital, the journal, the pills, the dreams. He listened without interrupting, his hands folded on the table like he was afraid of breaking the moment. You ever feel like your life happened to someone else? I asked. Every day, he said. He leaned in, voice low. I looked into your therapist. What you said, it lines up. There are sealed documents, gag orders, the whole mess. You weren't the only one. I exhaled, but it didn't feel like relief. It felt like free fall. Back at the house, Evelyn waited in the parlor like a queen in exile, sipping something clear from a cut glass tumbler. You've been out a lot lately, she said, not looking up. I needed air, I said. Air doesn't change what's broken. There it was, the casual cruelty wrapped in concern. I stepped closer. You knew those pills weren't vitamins. She set the glass down carefully. I knew you needed help. You drugged me. Her expression didn't change. You were unstable. You couldn't even get through school without incidents. I was a kid, I snapped. Number you were a threat, to yourself, to this family's name. It was like trying to argue with fog. Every word I said came back wrong. Her face, her posture, her voice. all perfect, poised, convinced of her own benevolence. I left before I shattered something. That night, I returned to the wall of memories. I added Leon's name, underlined it, drew a thick line from Evelyn to the blue pills, from the pills to the therapist, from the therapist to the attic door. I wasn't sure what was more terrifying, realizing how much I had forgotten, or realizing how much they had worked to make me forget. The first time I cried in front of Leon was on the side of the road, 2 miles outside town. We'd been following a lead, an old colleague of Dr. Callahan's, someone Leon had tracked down through one of his press contacts. The man hadn't answered our calls, but Leon insisted we try in person. He was driving. I was staring out the window, counting every fence post like it might steady my heartbeat. And then suddenly I wasn't counting anymore. I was weeping. No warning, no clear trigger, just the sound of tires on gravel and something inside me finally cracking wide open. Leon didn't say anything. He pulled over, turned the engine off, and waited. It wasn't awkward or rushed. He let the silence stretch until I could speak. "I feel like I don't belong anywhere," I whispered. He nodded. "Then let's build somewhere." That night, we sat on the back steps of his place, an old cottage he rented near the harbor. The air smelled like salt and cedar. He handed me a beer and a small notebook. "Start here," he said. "Not for the article, for you." So I wrote. I wrote until my fingers ached. I wrote about Evelyn's hands, how perfectly still they always were, even when her words left scars. I wrote about Walter's empty chair at dinner, Graham's sarcasm slicing like a scalpel. I wrote about the time I spilled juice on the parlor rug, and Evelyn made me scrub it for 2 hours, repeating, "Cleanliness reflects character." I was 6. There were nights Leon would read beside me while I filled pages. Other nights we talked. He told me about his father's anger, his mother's silences, the way he'd learned to lie about his bruises. We didn't have to pretend, not with each other. One night, I asked him why he never left this town. He looked at me, smile soft. "I was waiting for someone who knew what it was like to have a home that didn't want you." We were building something, I didn't know what, but it felt real, safer than anything I'd known. At the same time, the house back in Maine grew colder. Evelyn watched me more closely now. She noticed when I didn't wear the dresses she'd left hanging in my closet, when I wore boots instead of heels. She commented on my hair. "You used to take pride in your appearance." I told her I was tired. She said, "You used to try harder." Graham was worse. He made jokes at dinner, little jabs. "Careful, Addie. You're starting to sound unhinged again." I smiled without smiling. Good thing I've got practice. Walter rarely spoke, but I caught him watching me sometimes, like he was waiting for me to implode or escape. One afternoon, I was in his study while he was out, looking for an old photo album I thought might confirm something Leon and I had found. Instead, I found a locked drawer. It wasn't hard to pick. Evelyn had taught me the trick when I was 12, during one of her Be Prepared for Anything talks. Inside, I found documents, insurance papers, investment accounts, birth certificates. One of them had my name on it, my birth date. But the last name wasn't Monroe, it was Delaney, and under mother's name, Margot Delaney, not Evelyn. I stared at the paper, numb. Something shifted in me, something irreversible, like I'd been standing on a bridge and suddenly realized it had never been anchored to land. Who was Margot? Why did Walter have this? Why had they hidden it? I took a photo of the certificate with my phone, slipped it back, closed the drawer. My hands were shaking, but my heart wasn't. Not yet. That came later, when I sat with Leon and showed him. He didn't say anything right away, just looked at me, eyes wide. "You think they adopted you?" he asked. I shook my head. No papers, no legal stuff, just that. He leaned back, running a hand through his hair. "Maybe they didn't want you to know who you were." I laughed, but it wasn't funny. They made sure I didn't even know who I was supposed to be. It explained too much. The distance, the control. The way Evelyn always said we took you in when she was angry, then pretended it was just a figure of speech. The way Walter never told stories from when I was a baby. The complete absence of photographs from my first 2 years. That night, I wrote like I was possessed. I wrote about a girl raised to believe obedience was love, silence was virtue, and emotion was failure. I wrote about every time I'd blame myself. When Evelyn cried after a fight, when Graham told me I was toxic, when Walter walked out of the room and never looked back. They'd taught me to believe that if something felt wrong, it was because I was wrong. They'd taught me to apologize for my anger, to hide my joy, to shrink whenever I got too loud. It wasn't just abuse, it was education. But now I was choosing. I chose what I wore. I chose who I talked to. I chose to journal, to ask questions, to show up at Leon's with messy hair and no makeup. I walked the shoreline alone. I wore colors Evelyn hated. I laughed when I wanted. I didn't ask permission. The family I inherited built a cage and called it a home. The family I was creating didn't need bars at all. The house began to breathe. At first, I thought it was just my nerves, the way shadows clung to the corners longer than they should, how the lights dimmed without warning, even though the wiring had been replaced last winter. But the more I unearthed, the more the house responded. A chill would slip down the hallway when I passed the locked closet in the study. My bedroom door creaked open at night, slowly, like it was waiting for permission to enter. And the wallpaper. It had started to peel in the upstairs hallway, the same hallway where Evelyn used to make me stand for hours when I misbehaved. Reflection time, she'd called it. Think about the damage you do. Now that hallway curled at the edges, revealing the bones underneath. A house pretending not to rot. I didn't tell anyone, not at first. It sounded crazy, even to me, but I began to notice patterns. A door would stick the moment I touched something from the past. The lights in the parlor dimmed the night I pulled a box labeled Walter's Files from the attic. And always, always, there was that hum. Low, barely audible, like the house was listening. Della noticed too. She didn't say much, but her eyes followed me more often now, soft and uncertain. One morning I found her in the laundry room folding sheets. Her hands moved slowly, and when I passed, she said without looking up, "You've started to wake it." "What?" "The house. It remembers." She looked at me then, and her eyes weren't just old. They were exhausted. Later that evening, I caught her lingering in the hallway outside the old nursery. No one used that room anymore. It had been locked since I was a teenager. "I used to rock you in there," she whispered, before they said to stop. My breath hitched. "You knew me then?" She hesitated. Then, "I knew your mother." "Your real mother." Time dropped out beneath me. She came here once, only once. I wasn't supposed to speak to her, but I did. She asked about you. She cried. I couldn't breathe. What was her name? Margot. That name, again, a root threading its way through everything I thought was solid. Why didn't you ever say anything? I was told you wouldn't remember, that it would be easier for everyone if you didn't. Who told you that? But before she could answer, a voice cut through the hall like a blade. Is there a reason you're hovering outside locked rooms? Walter. He stood there, calm and polished, his hand resting on the banister like a king surveying his crumbling estate. His eyes went from Della to me. I straightened, but I didn't move. I was talking to Della, I said. Della has duties. If you need help locating something, you can ask me. Funny, I said. I don't remember you being so available. His mouth twitched. Is there something you're looking for, Adelaide? Number, but it seems like something's trying to find me. He took a step closer. His tone was smooth, but it held a weight that pressed. Your mother's not well lately. All this questioning, the secrets, it's not helping. Who's keeping secrets? I asked. Be careful what you dig up. You might not like the truth. I didn't flinch. I think I already don't. He didn't respond. Just turned, shoes echoing against the wooden floors, and disappeared into his study. That night, I walked the halls with my phone flashlight. The house seemed to pulse with every step. The shadows shifted slightly, never quite where I left them. I opened doors I hadn't touched in years. The guest bathroom where I once fainted after Evelyn's latest conversation. The linen closet where I hid the broken locket from my birth mother, before Evelyn made it disappear. Then I opened the library. Graham was inside. He looked up from a folder, expression unreadable. You really don't know when to quit. I ignored him, walked past the desk, straight to the shelves that lined the back wall. I didn't even know what I was looking for anymore. I just knew the answers were never where they said they were. He closed the folder slowly. You always liked pretending you were smarter than the rest of us. I turned. Pretending? Mom tried with you, she tried. But you always needed more. More attention, more drama. Funny, I remember her needing everything silent unless it was about her. He stood up, eyes narrowing. Don't rewrite history, Addie. I stepped toward him. I'm not. I'm recovering it. He snorted. You think any of this matters? So what if Mom lied? So what if Walter isn't your real father? You want a medal for trauma? I stared at him. I want my life back. He laughed bitterly. There's nothing to get back. You're not part of this family, not really. You never were. I left before I said something I couldn't take back. Back in my room, the air felt thick, heavy. I opened the window, let in the sea breeze. Somewhere deep in the house, a door slammed, without wind, without touch. I pulled the old journal from my drawer, the one I hadn't remembered writing. The handwriting still looked like mine, but the entries didn't echo my voice. Not really. They were too calm, too resigned. But tonight, something stood out. A sentence underlined twice. The house remembers even if I don't. Della told me the truth in a whisper, like she was confessing to a ghost. We were in the kitchen, late. The lights dimmed low enough that the shadows didn't feel like eavesdroppers. She was drying dishes with the same slow grace I remembered from childhood, and I was sitting at the table still holding the birth certificate I'd pulled from Walter's drawer. She couldn't have children, Della said, eyes on the dish in her hands. Evelyn, she tried for years, doctors, procedures, nothing worked, and she hated that, hated what it said about her. I didn't move, just listened, the edges of the paper pressing into my palm. Then one day she brought you home. No announcement, no court filings, just you. My throat tightened. Where did she get me? Della looked at me then. Her eyes didn't blink. From a woman named Margot. She was young, alone, vulnerable. Walter knew her through a business associate. She wanted to keep you, but Evelyn, she convinced her otherwise. Convinced? Della hesitated. Money changed hands, promises were made. Margot was supposed to have some contact, but after a few months, it all stopped. Because Evelyn made it stop? She nodded. I stared at the birth certificate. Delaney, Margot Delaney. What happened to her? I asked. Della turned back to the sink. I don't know, no one does. Her voice was too careful, which meant she had her suspicions, but fear kept them caged. When I got back to my room, I sat on the floor with the journal, the certificate, the folder of notes Leon and I had compiled. My life, laid out in fragments and lies. The walls felt too close. The ceiling dipped lower, and then it happened. Something inside snapped. I ripped open the drawers, pulled clothes from the closet, tossed pillows, frames, papers, everything. I needed to see it. I needed the mess to match the chaos inside my chest. Who am I? I sobbed, not even realizing I was screaming. The mirror cracked when I threw a book at it. My reflection shattered into 6 broken versions of myself. None of them looked right. I curled up on the floor and cried until there was nothing left. Leon came over the next morning. I didn't have to ask. He always knew. He brought coffee and sat beside me, his hand resting against my back like an anchor. I found something, he said, voice low. I looked up. His face was pale. The folder in his hand was thinner than I expected. But what was inside didn't need bulk to destroy me. It was a scanned copy of a contract, a payment agreement signed by Evelyn, a non-disclosure order, and a letter, typed, official, cold. By accepting this sum, Ms. Delaney agrees to surrender all parental rights. There was no signature from Margot. Leon looked at me. She didn't agree to disappear. Evelyn erased her. The storm hit that afternoon. Rain lashed the windows like it was trying to get in. Thunder cracked through the sky in steady, furious rhythms. I stood at the window, watching branches bend in the wind, and wondered how long I'd been weathering a storm I couldn't name. I thought of every time Evelyn had said, "You're lucky to be here." Every time Walter offered a nod instead of love. Every time Graham reminded me how grateful I should be. They didn't save me, they took me, shaped me into something manageable, then blamed me for the pieces that didn't fit. My phone buzzed. It was a notification from an encrypted file Leon had cracked earlier in the week, part of an old family server backup. I opened it. Medical documents, my name, age, notes from a private psychiatrist, language about recurring instability, high emotional volatility, family history of mental illness. I scrolled faster and faster. A scheduled admittance date, next week, under reason for recommitment. Psychotic delusions, self-harm, fixation on fabricated maternal narrative. Fabricated. I stared at the word, bile rising in my throat. They were going to have me committed. Again. I felt the floor shift beneath me, not physically, but in that soul-deep way, when the truth slams into you with such force, it reorders gravity. They weren't just trying to silence me, they were preparing to disappear me permanently. I backed away from the screen. Leon stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "Adelaide," he said gently. I looked up. "They're going to lock me up again." "I know." "What do I do?" He came closer, knelt beside me. "We fight back." They didn't deny it, not exactly. They just rewrote it, word by word, until the truth choked on itself. I confronted Evelyn first. She was in the conservatory, tending to a plant she never cared about before. She didn't look up when I stepped in. "I found the documents," I said. "I know you plan to commit me again." She clipped a dead leaf from the hydrangea. "You've always had a vivid imagination." "I found the payment agreement. I know about Margot. I know I'm not yours." That got her, just a flicker. Her hand paused, scissors hovering mid-air. "You were mine the moment I chose you," she said coolly. "That's more than most children get. You paid to disappear her. She was unfit. You deserved a better life." "A better life built on lies?" Her gaze turned to me, ice cracking in her eyes. "You would have ended up nowhere. You were born into chaos. I saved you." I felt something in my chest fracture. Number you built the chaos. You drugged me, gaslit me, tried to erase me. She smiled faintly. That's such a popular word now, isn't it? Gaslighting. Convenient, too. I left before I screamed. Walter was easier. He didn't bother posturing. When I showed him the files, he glanced at them and said, "Your mother handled all that." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one you'll get." He walked away, like he always did. But it was Graham who pushed everything past the edge. He found me outside, going through boxes in the garage, trying to find anything with Margot's name, any photo, any slip-up. "You're not going to find a smoking gun," he said, leaning against the frame like he was amused. "I've already found 3. He snorted. "What do you want, Addie? A movie deal? A sympathy parade?" "I want to stop being treated like I'm insane for telling the truth." He stepped closer, too close. "You are insane, that's the whole problem. You've always been off, paranoid, self-absorbed. You're scared. Of what? You? You're nothing. You've always been nothing." I moved past him, but he grabbed my arm. "Stop digging." "Or what?" I snapped. His grip tightened. "You're already halfway back to the psych ward. Don't give them a reason." I yanked free. "You already gave them one." Leon was waiting in the car. He saw my face and didn't ask, just handed me the laptop. "I found cameras." I stared at him. "What?" "In your room, hidden in the molding. One in the closet, one near the vent, wired to an old internal server." I couldn't speak. "Someone's been watching you for years." Control, surveillance, staging. They hadn't just lied about who I was, they'd monitored the performance. I went back inside and ripped the molding from my bedroom wall. Wires spilled like veins. I followed them to the vent, unscrewed it, pulled out a tiny black camera. I wanted to be sick. Every outburst, every breakdown, every night I cried alone. They'd watched it all, documented it, Probably edited it into a story that justified every sedative, every institutional threat. I set the camera on the desk and turned on my phone. Record. This is Adelaide. If anything happens to me, I want the world to know who they are. I panned the camera across the wires, across the mess of my torn wall, across the mirror, cracked, like me. I stood in front of it, looked into my own reflection. My eyes were bloodshot. My lip trembled. But I didn't look away. "You're not crazy," I whispered. "They just made you feel like you were." I became a historian of my own damage. The walls of my room turned into a living archive. Journals stacked high like artifacts, recordings neatly labeled by date, a corkboard webbed with twine and Polaroids. Voice memos whispered truths into the dark. My own voice, cataloging details I was terrified to forget again. I wasn't just trying to prove what had been done to me. I was trying to believe it myself. Leon helped me digitize everything. He brought external drives, backup servers, encryption software. We worked late into the night, speaking less and less, understanding more in silence. He called me the archivist once. It stuck. Each page I turned, each clip I edited was a wound opened and named. I started reaching out. Old family friends, neighbors, teachers who'd known us back then. Most said nothing, some hung up. One man said, "You're dredging up things that should stay buried." But one woman, Dorothy Slade, a retired librarian who used to attend the same church as my family, agreed to meet. Her hands trembled as she stirred sugar into her tea. Her hair was white, her eyes clear. "They did the same to your aunt," she said. I blinked. "My what?" "Evelyn's younger sister. Her name was Claire. She was soft. Too soft for that house. I used to see her after Sunday service, always looking down, like she was afraid of her own voice. What happened to her?" "They sent her away, said she was unstable, but I remember hearing Evelyn say, 'She's going to ruin everything.' And then Claire was gone. Just gone." The puzzle sharpened. It wasn't just me. It was a pattern, one shaped long before I arrived. That night, I dug through the basement, pulling out old VHS tapes Evelyn had stored in dust-covered crates. Most were home videos. Graham's birthday parties, Walter's business dinners, church functions where I stood on the edge of the frame, barely visible. Then I found one marked in red ink. Claire, 1983. I watched it alone. Claire was young, maybe 15, sitting in a garden chair. Evelyn paced behind her, voice sharp and controlled. "You're making a fool of yourself. This crying, it's manipulative." Claire didn't speak. She just clutched her knees and rocked slightly. "You think anyone will love you like this?" Evelyn continued. "You think the world will be kind to girls who break down?" Claire flinched, but Evelyn smiled, soft and terrifying. "You're going to pull yourself together, and you're going to thank me one day." I turned off the tape, my hands shaking. Evelyn wasn't born this way. She was made. The cruelty, the control, they weren't accidents. They were survival tactics handed down like heirlooms. She had learned to enforce before she learned to protect. Later, I confronted her. She was in the drawing room, reading one of Walter's old law journals. "I met someone who remembered Claire," I said. Her head didn't move, but her fingers froze on the page. "She said you broke her." Evelyn looked up. Her expression was unreadable. "She was weak," she said simply. "She let the world destroy her. I wouldn't let the same happen to you." I stepped closer. "You became what hurt you. You were supposed to be better." Her voice rose, not loud but full. "You were the chance to fix it, and you broke." "No," I said. "I survived." She laughed, but it cracked, a dry, bitter sound that barely held together. "You'll see," she said quietly. "You'll learn. The world doesn't care about truth. It cares about control." I left her there, surrounded by pages written by men who had no idea what women like Evelyn and I carried. That evening, Leon got the email. No subject, no name, just a link. The video was grainy, time-stamped 23 years ago. It showed a woman sitting in a plain chair in what looked like a medical office. She was pale, tear-streaked, holding a newborn wrapped in a pink blanket. "Margot." Evelyn sat across from her. Her voice was low, calculated. "You said you couldn't provide for her. We can." Margot shook her head. "I changed my mind." Evelyn leaned forward. You're unstable. I've already spoken to someone at county. They'll take her if we don't. Margot cried harder. Please, she's mine. Not anymore. The video ended. Leon didn't say anything. He just hit play again. And again. I stared at the screen, at the woman I had never met and yet somehow carried in every cell. She had fought, she had begged, and Evelyn had stolen me anyway. It was proof. It was horror. It was the final piece. I uploaded it to my archive, and I backed it up a dozen times because this wasn't just my story anymore. It was hers, too. It took less than 24 hours for the town to turn. The video went live on a Tuesday morning. Leon uploaded it to 3 local news sites, each with a quiet, unassuming headline: Monroe Family Scandal, Secret Adoption and Coerced Surrender Uncovered. We included the timestamp, the backstory, and enough corroboration to ensure it couldn't be swept under the rug. By noon, it was everywhere. At first, the responses were cautious. There must be a mistake. Surely this was edited. Evelyn Monroe would never. But by the next day, the whispers grew teeth. Storefront conversations turned to murmurs. Women who once hosted brunches with Evelyn stopped answering her calls. Her book club was postponed indefinitely. The church issued a formal statement about accountability and healing. Walter's name was quietly removed from the local development board. People stopped pretending. Walter vanished 2 days later. No warning, just an empty closet and a missing suitcase. He left a note. Don't make this worse. That was all. Years of silence distilled into a single cowardly sentence. Graham, on the other hand, didn't go quietly. He showed up at the gate in a fitted suit, fire in his eyes, and a cease and desist letter in his hand. You've ruined everything, he said. I told the truth. You're defaming our family. Our family defamed itself. You're mentally unwell. And you're scared. He tried to shove the envelope into my hand. I didn't take it. Leon stepped out behind me. You might want to talk to your lawyer before filing anything. The footage has been verified. You think this makes you a hero? Graham sneered. No, I said. It makes me free. He left without another word. The cease and desist was never filed, but the damage was done, and not just to them. Della was let go the next morning. Evelyn claimed she had violated confidentiality. She made it sound like a legal matter, but really it was punishment. Della had loved me, quietly, imperfectly, but more honestly than anyone else in that house. And for that, Evelyn couldn't forgive her. I found Della packing in the servants' wing, folding clothes into a canvas bag with trembling hands. You don't have to go, I said. Her eyes met mine, soft and sad. I was never meant to stay. I reached for her hand. Come with me. She hesitated, then nodded. We rented a small house off the main road, just outside town, where the trees were taller and the silence was clean. It had 2 bedrooms, a porch swing, and a wide window that let in morning light. Della moved into the downstairs room. I took the attic. We made coffee every morning and sat in silence together. Sometimes silence was enough, but I knew the real reckoning had to come in my voice, not just in footage or documents or whispered interviews, in words, in front of people. So I stood at the podium of the Brighton Community Center 2 weeks after the story broke. The room was packed. Locals, reporters, old classmates, strangers who had recognized something of their own pain in mine. I adjusted the microphone and cleared my throat. My name is Adelaide Delaney. That alone caused a stir. I saw the flicker in their eyes, the shift. I was raised in a house where truth was negotiable, where love had conditions, where silence was the only way to survive. I paused. For years, I thought I was broken. I thought every time I cried, every time I screamed, every time I pushed back, it meant I was failing, but I wasn't. I was resisting. I told them everything about Evelyn, about Margot, about the sedatives, the surveillance, the manipulation. I told them about the girl I used to be, the one who stood too quietly, who bit her tongue so often she forgot what her voice sounded like. And then I said, I'm not here because I want pity. I'm here because shame thrives in silence, and I'm done being silent. When I finished, there was no applause, just stillness. Then, one by one, people stood. Not for performance, not for approval, but for solidarity. A girl in the third row was crying. A man in the back whispered, "Me too." A mother clutched her daughter's hand like it meant everything. I stepped off the stage lighter than I'd felt in years. This wasn't the end of the story, but it was the beginning of something true. The cabin stood on the edge of the world, or at least it felt that way. Painted a soft dove gray, it sat where the woods kissed the Atlantic, with wide windows that soaked in morning light and salt air. The porch creaked just enough to feel like home, and the kitchen smelled of lemon oil and second chances. Leon found it. I fell in love with it before I'd even stepped inside. We didn't call it a fresh start. That would have been too clean, too neat. It was something messier, more honest, like picking up broken glass and turning it into stained windows. Our days began with coffee and silence, then long walks along the coast. I started to sleep again, not deeply, not always, but enough that I didn't fear my dreams. The cabin's walls didn't watch me. Its floors didn't whisper lies. For the first time, the space around me wasn't holding a secret. Twice a week, I saw a therapist in town. Her name was Rosa. She wore no makeup, sat cross-legged in a faded armchair, and asked questions like she wasn't afraid of what might surface. She didn't flinch when I told her about the pills, the cameras, the hospital stays that weren't about healing but containment. "Say it," she encouraged one session, her voice soft but firm. "I was stolen," I whispered. Again. "I was stolen, my mother was erased, and they made me grateful for it." That session ended with both of us in tears. Back at the cabin, I started a podcast. It was Leon's idea. "You've got the story, and people need it." I called it Unburied. Each episode opened with my voice, quiet and sure. "This is Adelaide Delaney, and I'm done hiding." I shared pieces of my journey, my mother's disappearance, my family's manufactured past, the lies that stitched themselves into my identity. And soon, others began to send their stories too. Women and men, teenagers, elders, people who had been gaslit, silenced, reshaped. I read them aloud. I gave them the voice I had once begged for. By the third month, the podcast had thousands of subscribers. Support groups began to form. Donations came in. We built a resource site, a therapist directory, a legal aid initiative. Survivors found each other in the static. My inbox became a lifeline. I thought I was crazy until I heard you. You made me believe my story matters. Thank you for saying the words I couldn't. Leon worked beside me, quietly brilliant. He handled the editing, the logistics, the avalanche of responses. And one night, after a particularly moving interview with a woman whose family locked her in a basement for praying wrong, he turned to me and said, "We should write a book." I blinked. Together? Together, a chronicle, not just your story. All of it, yours, mine, theirs. The way trauma travels through generations like wildfire. The way silence breeds it. The way truth breaks it. I nodded before I even fully processed the offer. "Yes," I said, "let's do it." It felt like standing in light after years underground. We drafted an outline, divided chapters, pitched it to a publisher Leon knew from his reporting days. The response came quickly, enthusiastic, supportive, stunned. They offered an advance. We said yes. Della came to visit often. She brought homemade bread and stories of Evelyn's increasingly erratic behavior. "She keeps asking about you," she said once, but not with concern, more like, she's looking for the final thread she forgot to cut. I no longer feared Evelyn. Pity had replaced rage. What she had done was unforgivable, but the woman behind it had been broken long before I arrived. One morning, a letter arrived at the cabin. No return address. Just my name, handwritten in slanted cursive, Adelaide Delaney. Inside was a single page, plain stationery, careful handwriting. "I think I'm your sister. I've been searching for you. My name is Celeste. Margot was my mother too." My breath left my body in one sharp exhale. I read the letter again, and again, the ink didn't smudge, the words didn't change. Leon found me standing at the kitchen table, frozen. "Another story?" he asked. I nodded slowly. "Number the next chapter." The drive to Vermont felt like crossing into another life. The letter had included only a name, Celeste, and a town. No number, no instructions. Just the kind of hope that leaves more questions than it answers. Still, I packed a small bag, printed a map, and told Leon I needed to do this alone. He didn't argue, just kissed my forehead and said, "Find what's waiting." I arrived just past dusk, the sky painted in bruised purples and fading orange. The address Celeste had written belonged to a modest, sloped-roof house surrounded by pine. Wind chimes clinked softly on the porch. I stood there for a long time before I knocked. When she opened the door, I forgot how to breathe. She looked like Margot. Not exactly, but enough. The same cheekbones, the same hesitant eyes, hair darker, frame smaller, but there was no mistaking the blood between us. She froze too, a breath caught halfway to speech. "Adelaide?" she asked. I nodded. Yes. And then, without planning it, without rehearsing a single word, we fell into each other's arms. We sat on her porch wrapped in blankets and silence for the first hour, sipping lukewarm tea neither of us touched. Eventually, she said, "I almost didn't write. I wasn't sure if you'd hate me, or her, or yourself." "I think I've hated all three," I said softly, but not anymore. Her laugh was low, disbelieving. "You look like her. I only had one photo, but it's the eyes." "I never knew her," I said, "not really." "I barely did. She gave me up too, but later, when she was sick." She went quiet then, fingers tightening around the mug. "She told me about you once, when I was 10. Said she had a daughter who was stolen. She never gave up looking. Said your name was Adelaide. I didn't believe her. I thought it was one of her episodes." We talked until the stars blanketed the sky. Her life had been different, but not easier. Foster homes, a failed adoption, years of being told she was too angry, too needy, too much. There were institutions just like me, doctors just like me, medications for what they didn't understand, two sisters raised in different cages, breathing the same poisoned air. By morning, we were still sitting there, sharing every scar. She asked me, "Do you ever feel like love should have saved us?" I nodded, and then I remember, it didn't know where we were. We drove later that afternoon to a small orchard just outside her town. It had burned years ago, a wildfire sparked by lightning and dry season cruelty. But beneath the scorched trunks, green had returned. Small trees grew between the blackened ones, quiet, steady. We walked among them slowly, not speaking. Celeste paused at a charred stump, then reached down to touch the roots, half exposed but alive. "This is us," she said, "burned but not dead." I smiled. "Growing anyway." She looked at me. "What name do you go by now?" I didn't answer right away. Then, as the breeze caught the trees and the orchard side around us, I said it. "My name is Adelaide Delaney." It felt like truth, whole, spoken without fear. She smiled, and for the first time I felt the family tree shift. Not break, not rot, but stretch, toward light. Hospitals always smell the same, sanitized resignation and cheap flowers. I hadn't planned to see her, but when Della called and said Evelyn had been admitted after a fall, something inside me shifted. Not pity, not forgiveness, something quieter. A desire to see the person, not the ghost she had become. She looked smaller than I remembered. The bed swallowed her frame. Her silver hair was unkempt, and for once there was no lipstick, no pearls, no perfectly composed expression. Just skin, weathered and worn, and eyes that had grown too tired to lie. She turned her head when I entered. "I thought you might come," she said. I sat beside her. The air between us was thick with unfinished sentences. "I don't hate you," I said before she could ask. She smiled faintly. "You should." "I did for a long time." She nodded as if that answer was more honest than she expected. "I tried," she whispered, "to make you strong. You tried to make me quiet. You were always too loud, too emotional, too much like her." "Like Margot?" She didn't answer, but her eyes shifted. "She wasn't weak," I said. "She fought for me." "She was reckless," Evelyn said slowly. "She wanted love to fix everything. And you wanted control to protect everything." She coughed lightly, a tremor rippling through her. It was all falling apart. Walter's career, our name. I couldn't let it all burn. So you stole a child? She looked at me then, truly looked. I saved you from her chaos, she said, and then you brought your own. There it was, not remorse, not guilt, just a final, exhausted truth. I stood. You named me, I said, voice steady, but I decide who I am. She didn't argue, she just closed her eyes. That was the last time I saw her. I didn't attend the funeral when it came weeks later. Graham handled the arrangements. Walter remained gone. I didn't need a front row seat to the final act of their facade. Instead, I stayed in the cabin. I recorded. That day, I sat in front of the microphone, sunlight on my face, wind rustling the window pane, and told the final part of my story. This is Adelaide Delaney, I said, voice calm, and this is how I took my name back. I spoke of Evelyn's final words, of the truth that doesn't always come with apologies, of the stories we inherit and the ones we choose to end. Some people will tell you family is everything, but I've learned that family isn't who names you, it's who sees you, who hears you, who believes you. I paused, let the silence breathe. I wasn't born whole. I was pieced together by women who were broken, by truths buried beneath shame. But I found the fragments. I named the pain, and I built something new. The episode ended not with music, but with stillness. Then I turned toward the camera. Our podcast was now filmed too, and looked directly into it. No fear, no flinch. Thank you for listening, for surviving, for becoming. And I smiled, not for them, for me.